please, oh, love to the children, yeah, in their eyes are the answers we see.
Now, here's today's host, Dr. Monika Buerger.
And their hearts lead the way.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Look to the Children Pediatrics show. I'm your host, Dr. Monika Buerger, and I'm super excited to share with you an amazing gentleman and chiropractor. Actually, he's joining us all the way from the UK. I want to thank ChiroSecure for giving us this opportunity to spread the word and to help more children and more families live a life full of optimal wellness and health. My guest today is Dr. Steve Williams. Hi, Steve.
G'day, Monika.
Hello. Thank you for being here. You're joining us all the way from the UK, and I know you had to switch your schedule around. And Dr. Steve is the current vice president of the British Chiropractic Association. He is an original founder and subsequent instructor for the Masters of Chiropractic Pediatrics and for the Anglo-European Chiropractic College. He is the author of an amazing textbook, Pregnancy and Pediatrics, a Chiropractic Approach. And he lectures throughout the US, Europe, Australia, to chiropractors. And get this, not just chiropractors, but also MDs and dentists. Yay, kudos to you. He's been a major forefront in the movement in chiropractic pediatric care in Europe. So we thank you for that. And he holds down a busy family practice in Southampton area of the UK, and he is the founder of Chiropractic. Functional Pediatric Chiropractic. So thank you again for being here, Dr. Steve. How are you this afternoon for you, right?
It's this afternoon, yes. I'm just getting towards the end of my day's practice. Just got a few more patients. I'm doing fantastically, thank you. And it's a real honor to be on this. Thank you very much for asking me.
Well, I so appreciate it. Dr. Steve and I met at the Kids Summit at the end of September in Chicago. And he just blew my mind when I heard his lecture. And I'm like, we got to talk a little bit together, but at those conferences, you can't really talk a lot. And I was like, I need more of this man. I need more of this gentleman. So I hunted him down and I asked him, would you please be our guest? Because you've got so much to offer the profession and children as a whole. So I want to ask you, you lecture and you speak to not just chiropractors, but MDs and dentists. So could you give us a little bit of insight of what that sounds like or looks like, and how did you get there?
Well, interestingly, that I started speaking to actually dentists rather than chiropractors. My first speaking engagement in pediatrics was by a dental group in the UK who knew I had an interest in pediatrics, knew I was treating a lot of kids, and that I had developed a particular interest in plagiocephaly, or asymmetric head shapes. And it's via that, because the thing is, the dental groups and often the medics who go on to operate on them will see these skull strains, these skull asymmetries, but we'll see them by the bite. So they get the bite asymmetries, and lots of the time the skull strain is driving that bite asymmetry. So your cross bites are driven by a particular skull strain pattern, unilateral cross bites by another one, inferior sort of an overbite by another one, an underbite by another strain pattern. It's all the skull specifying this. So that's the way I got into it. Yeah, it's been good fun. It's been good fun and largely very well received because it's an area they don't know very much about.
And so do you actually work with them for you to work with that child prior to them doing their work on the jaw structure?
Well, I was very lucky. My practice was actually largely built by two now very retired dentists, one of them unfortunately deceased, who you would send me every patient before they would undertake orthodontic care for an assessment with me, because they found their difficult ones were my easy ones. And once we got the skull moving, and then that would drive the orthodontics becoming, or the orthopedics they were doing on them, would become easy. So it's really a question of, it was how I got into doing a lot of cranial work was via dental grips. So yeah, and I still work with a number of dentists in the south of England. I'm very lucky to do that.
Wonderful. So I have to ask you, it came up at the Kids Summit, and it's kind of very much on the rise here in regards to tethered oral tissues, lip tie, tongue tie, buccal ties. Are you seeing that more on the rise over in the UK?
Oh, 100%, Monika. And, I think you're the real expert on this at the moment, so I'm slightly nervous I'm talking about this, but yes, we're seeing it increasing really significantly. And I think it's because there's a linkage to the MTHFR gene, which is becoming more and more expressed by the toxic world we live in and difficult methylation pathways, and we're getting those central defects occurring, and which are creating skull strains and the various other sucking problems and feeding problems and issues going on like that. So yes, I've seen an extraordinary amount more than I used to.
Yeah, we are here too. And it is methylation as a whole, not just the MTHFR gene, but you're right, it's methylation and the epigenetic effects as a whole. So we talked a little bit, and are you seeing plagiocephaly presentations on the rise as well?
An extraordinary amount. Again, I've been, I hate to admit, seeing children for over 30 years now. And when I first got into practice, yes, we were seeing skull strains, skull asymmetries, but they were in the days where actually people were advised to lay their baby on the tummy rather than supine. And plagiocephaly was not the issue it is today. And today we're seeing it extremely commonly. And I think there are a number of factors, one of them being the Back to Sleep campaign, which has contributed towards a significant increase in skull asymmetry, but it's not, by no means, it's not the only one.
No. And I think methylation plays into that as well. And especially if you have a buccal tie, which is pulling that presentation to one side. So that is definitely, it was interesting. I just did a class on online on tethered oral restrictions, and I want to get your feedback on this a little bit. In my research, they were showing that with developmental plagiocephaly, there was actually changes in the brain, the shape of the brain, particularly the cerebellum. And then in other studies, they looked at young boys on the autism spectrum, and they found that that flattened shape of the brain itself, particularly the cerebellum, if it's on that right side, that's going to deal with language processing and so forth, and language development. And they found that connection between the flattened shape of the skull, flattened shape of the cerebellum, and language acquisition. Are you seeing any more of those patterns, those ties together in your practice?
Yeah, very much so. And there's a huge amount of evidence that's come forward now showing that skull asymmetries will tend to drive both by both abnormal gross motor and fine motor skill development and speech development. And so it's not just about a single area. These kids have multiple factors. Now, one of the things you've got to look at is if a child has poor development, they're less likely to move the head very much, and they're more likely to have plagiocephaly. So it's a sort of double feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's both going on, but undoubtedly that in my experience, that plagiocephaly leads to a lot of developmental issues, and speech being one of them. How many kids are we seeing with speech issues these days?
Absolutely, drastically on the rise. Are you seeing any other? What is the? Are you seeing one specific pattern over another in regards to deformation patterns?
Well, there are two extremely common patterns, which are the what we call a real plagiocephaly, which is what the osteopaths call the oblique skull, where you get one side of the forehead forward and the occiput flat on that side, and the other side of the forehead flat, and the occiput bulging at the back. So you get the sort of obliquity to the skull. That AP strain is very, very common. Now, my primary thing is that's probably created by the mum having a strong PIAS rotation of her pelvis, an anterior inferior sacrum, and creating a torque on her head, twisting that lower part of the head round, the head round via the lower part of the uterus in the last few months of pregnancy. And then we're seeing those children who, because they have that torque going on, or because they get an upper cervical subluxation during the birth process, who then can't rotate towards one side. They rotate towards that one side, and they're going to lie, and they're going to flatten the bit they're lying on, and then they get what we call a plate strain, so they get a unilateral flattening. And we're seeing those two as being the most common. There are a number of other strain patterns that occur, particularly with forceps usage, and various other, and if they have a face presentation, we can usually tell a face presentation, it will be a particular kind of cranial presentation after that. So you can see what's happened either in the birth process or in the early life afterwards very, very easily from the skull shape.
Right. All the more reason we need to get pregnant women under care, under chiropractic care.
Could not agree more. I would be happy when all women actually are coming in, I want to get pregnant, what do I need to do? Right.
Yeah. You know, I think the reason I resonated with you so much in Chicago was our, both of, and of course, everybody, hopefully everybody that's listening to this, our passion for early intervention. I think in the States, we have programs within our schools called early intervention, and that's gearing more towards catching children with developmental delays and behavioral patterns and unfortunately medications.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost like in today's world with so much strain on the epigenetic load, our traumas, toxins, thoughts, and technology, by the time the child's born, it's like the horse has left the barn already. So we really kind of need to back up the cart and look at preconception care and certainly prenatal care. Do you agree that I think we're kind of on the same wavelength about that?
Oh, strongly so. I mean, in reality, I think women need to get ready to have children, both from a point of view of diet, exercise, whole lifestyle stuff, thought processes, and everything else. Because we know a highly stressed individual is more likely to have a baby with issues related to fear paralysis reflex, motor reflex, developmental issues, and there's a whole range of stuff. And really, we've become, as a species, we've become weaker, and we're now passing this on to our children, and we're getting these kids coming through with more and more issues. And asthma's become massive. All of these kind of illnesses. Tell me how many babies don't have reflux these days, or diagnosed with reflux. It's massive, and so and it's great for business, frankly. But it's not satisfactory for actually the future of our species. We need to start taking it very seriously and doing something about it, and decreasing the toxic load on people, particularly. Absolutely,
our resiliency, is diminishing. Our nervous system ability to adapt, and that's really what it's all about. The efficient nervous system to be able to adapt. What you spoke a little bit in Chicago about some, you and I share again that connection with the microbiome, and the research is coming out in the last couple of years in regards to very specific strains of bacterium affecting very specific areas of the brain, like the limbic system, and like you talked about, so many children are coming out with the startle, and they're stuck in what I call that limbic lock and load mode. But that research is fascinating to me as regards to very specific strains targeting the frontal lobe, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, and so forth. What are some key things that you look at or suggest for during pregnancy or for the little fiddle farts once they're here in this world?
That's a great name to call them. I like that. I might steal that. In reality, the primary thing, I try and get all mums trying to eat a much more natural diet, because in the end, taking probiotics is one of those things. Do they survive the journey? Do they actually colonize effectively? Well, there's mixed evidence as whether they do. But the key thing is they start eating well and eating properly and avoiding foods which actually kill off your microbiome. That can start populating it. I do put mums on really significant, having said all that, whether they can colonate, I put them on a significant amount of probiotics, and I have a sort of a regime I work through of various different probiotics, trying to get their diet right, trying to get their lifestyle right, so they'll hold on to something. And then we encourage them to have a home birth. If you can do a home birth, we know the microbiome, this great paper came out very recently showing that if you actually have a home birth, you get a better microbiome than you do in hospital, even if you have a vaginal birth. I'll send that paper on to you if you haven't seen it.
Yes, absolutely.
It's fantastic. And there's so much evidence for this, that the microbiome specifies what your long-term health outcomes are going to be. So I will then go over the top about, right, mum's got to breastfeed. They've got to breastfeed for as long as they can. They've got to get the good bacteria into that child. They've got to get a good lifestyle, try and avoid the drugs and the things which we know kill off the microbiome, and feed the child appropriately. But I also use children's probiotics right the way through, because I think there's a few interesting papers I've seen that really say the first couple of years of life are where you can make the major changes to that microbiome. And after that, you may need to keep reloading it to actually get the bacteria there. But I think in the end, it's a real lifestyle thing. And I'll try and talk to the mums and tell them, what you do to yourself and your body, it specifies what's going to happen to your child. Absolutely. How good that child's going to be for the future. And if you start getting that into their consciousness, no mum wants to do anything harmful to their child. They really don't. They want to do the best they possibly can. Most of them just don't know what that is, and they're very surprised when you start telling them, actually, eating that cookie isn't the best thing in the world for that child. Well, how's it? Just a bit of sugar. No, it's bad fat. It's a whole range of inflammatory issues. It's going to tip that inflammatory cascade over and drive them into a very negative direction.
Absolutely.
So education is the primary thing with the parents, I think.
Right. And you spoke about vitamin D in your lecture. Here, at least in the States, there functional dentistry has been on the rise. You would deal with so many dentists. I wonder if you heard this, but they, my understanding is they talk about low vitamin D, vitamin A, and vitamin K, K2. Do you see any correlation between? I know in the functional dentistry world they look at like the elongated face presentation. Are you seeing any correlation between those nutritional deficiencies and skull deformities?
Well, I'm an old devotee of Weston Price. I read his work 28 years ago, something like that, and it's just wonderful stuff. And he didn't even know what K2 was called. I think he called it Activator X or something like that, but actually he knew there was something else that these guys needed. And yes, the fat-soluble vitamins are a major part of it. Yes, you see the lack of formation of the upper arch when they're doing this. So we try and get them on, ideally, a diet full of fat-soluble vitamins, but a lot of people won't do it. I mean, A can be a really difficult thing to get in. And there are some people who don't process the vegetable side of the A, the beta-carotene, and they actually need to get some of the animal component in. I'm one of those. I've had my genes done, and I know I need extra vitamin A. And I think there's quite a few people like that. So I do use supplemental, small amounts of vitamin A, vitamin E, K2, and quite a lot of K2 and D, to be perfectly honest, in the children, to try and drive that system and encourage and particularly for their brain development.
Right, absolutely. So you also focus on early intervention or preventive. Is there any tidbit that you can give other docs out there of any red flags that you look at where you want to intervene as early as possible?
Well, it's one of those things that I now check primitive reflexes repetitively, and I start very early. We want to see the primitive reflexes early. We want to see them fully expressed, and then we want to see them integrated. And, if a kid's still got a grasp reflex at 4 months, I'm not really very happy. It should be losing it. If it's still got a rooting reflex at 4 months, it should be decreasing. the morrow's still as strong. It ain't a good sign. So I think we've got to really look at the neurology of these children, because it will tell us how they're doing. It will tell us what's going on in their system. And intervention, adjusting them, balancing the sacrum, balancing the upper cervical spine, getting the skull base in order, that will just do a massive amount. And particularly the skull base, once you've got the sacrum, upper cervical spine, getting that skull base normalized, you normalize the jugular foramen. You've got the cranial nerves 9, 10, 11. You've got the vagus there. You've got the blood drainage for the cranium coming out of two tiny little holes right between the occiput and the temporal bones. They can cause all kinds of issues with that balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic. If there's an issue with that, we're going to get some really significant issues with those. So that's what I really look for. And I use a lot of work on the reflexes to try and get that balance.
Absolutely. And we know those reflexes can reemerge in times of stress. So if they have an incident where they fall off the changing table, or when they're learning to walk and they fall on their bum or so forth, we can see those reactivate. So following those along the course of life, or even infection, can reactivate those reflexes. So absolutely. Any other words of wisdom that, we could have you here for hours and hours. So tell me a little bit about your functional pediatric program.
Okay, so what we've done is put together, I do 4 12-hour weekends for a pediatric program, which I teach, which we do pregnancy for the first one, treating the pregnant female, a bit about birth trauma, and then we look at treatment of the neonate and young child in the next one, an examination, particularly the cranial system, and then we look at plagiocephaly, neurobehavioral, and then specific syndromes the kids get, like reflux, colic, sucking disorders, ear infections, those kind of things, and the things we see commonly in practice. And what I've found is I've got way too much information to put into the seminars now. I could be doing hundreds of hours of seminars, literally. So what I've started doing is actually putting that into an online program, and it's an examined online program. There are exams at the end of sections, because people actually want to be able to show. They want to realize they've got a competency, and they also want to get certificated that they've got that they've studied this and they've got a competency on that, which is great. And we really want more people out there doing this. And so the online program is really to get more people to access it. Hopefully that won't stop people entirely coming to the seminars, but the seminars will become much more about very much the hands-on element. We teach the hands-on element in the most approachable way during the online program, but lots of people actually want to get that hands-on as well themselves. So absolutely. We do a bit of both of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you do incredible work, and I thank you for being a part of our show today, and taking the time out of your schedule. And any return visits to the U.S. planned?
Oh, for sure. I come over most years to teach at Saucy, which is usually in Denver around October, and I'm looking at coming out for that. But I think I'm actually there could be a couple of surprise seminars coming up in the US and Europe over the next year. So keep watching, and if people want to check us out, either www. Academy of Functional Pediatrics or stjameschiro.co.uk. Either of those, you can get to those, and then we can let them know about any seminars or presentations we do. And when I'm over, I'd hope to come and look you up and meet and talk. I think we've got so much in common with where our passions are with this this wonderful chiropractic pediatrics.
Yeah, well, our mission, I think the early intervention thing, I think we as chiropractors should define early intervention, and it's much more than what is out there in this day and age. One last thing I'd like to pick your brain about, in regards to, we know that tummy time is so important. Are you seeing any specific patterns or anything, words of wisdom you can give? That's a big thing out here in tummy time. Any specific patterns or things you could throw our way real quick? Yeah,
well, tummy time is becoming an issue, and lots of people expect their babies not to get unhappy when you put them on the tummy and stuff like that. And you've got to say, some babies don't like being on their front very much. I don't care. They've got to still go on their front. And there are various ways you can ameliorate it. If you just hang on one second there. He says diving away from the camera. I apologize about that. That's not going to please anyone. Okay. One of the things you can do is actually fly a baby around the place. Actually, this can actually start activating the extensors of actually holding the baby underneath them and playing a little game with them to work them around. The other thing we do is we put them over an exercise ball. We've all got those sort of fit balls or yoga balls, Pilates balls, whatever they're called. But you can lie the baby over the ball. And particularly if they have a Plagiocephaly, it's a wonderful exercise to just hold the legs, stabilize the pelvis, and roll the baby down towards the floor. As they do that, the baby will extend, will actually come into that extension reaction, which will fire off the extensors, which will start pulling out any of the distortion in the skull base. And if they've got a particular one-sided flattening, the mum should stand on that one side and talk to the baby, and it will tend to turn the head towards them. Okay, while they do it, and it'll be more on that side. So that rolling towards the floor, some parents are a bit scared of it, so we do it in there first with the baby and show the baby actually loves it. And it tends to make tummy time fun. And the other thing I recommend that parents do, as I do, I put the baby on the tummy and I get right down and I start talking to them down there. So you can actually speak to the baby and make it fun for them being down there, not just put down on their tummy and left trying to struggle to move. And when it's a fun thing, it tends to be better. But there's an absolute lack of tummy time. There's too much time spent in those awful car seats for traveling in cars. And yes, they do save babies' lives in accidents, but sitting upright with pressure on their head when they're very young is not great. And we need to get them actually exercising. A baby needs a workout several times a day. And one of the workouts they've got to do is getting on their tummy. And then they start bringing their hands forward to prop. And then the propping starts going into the reptilian reflexes, etc., etc. And they start coming more upright. So, yeah, really getting them on their front and actually telling the parents you've got to do it. You're not being cruel to your baby, you're being kind. Because that first year is a battling against gravity. They need to get up against gravity by themselves. And the first thing they need to do is develop that extensor tone to start driving it.
And we get all that input to the cerebellum, which is so huge. So anyway.
Absolutely.
We could go on for hours, couldn't we?
We could, Monika. I have no doubt about that.
Well, again, thank you so much for taking time. God bless you for doing your work over there. And I look forward to hooking up again in our travels somewhere.
So do I, Monika. I hope we do. And please keep doing your wonderful stuff.
You do the same. And again, thank you so much. You have a wonderful rest of the day out there.
Thank you very much. Back to patients.
Thank you. And everybody, be sure to join Dr. Tony Ebel on December 6th for the next Look to the Children's episode. And again, I want to thank ChiroSecure for making this available and making this an option for us to really get out there and change lives and change the future. And look us up at Intersect for Life if you want some more information on our program. And until then, have an amazing Thanksgiving, everybody. And go out there and let's do our job and change the world.
Today's Pediatrics show, Look to the Children, was brought to you by ChiroSecure and the award-winning book series, I Am a Lovable Me. Make sure you join us next week, right here at the same time. See you next week.